Good evening, everyone. Today we will start with this X-ray diffraction. Okay. So, as the name suggests, in this study we will be using X-rays as the electromagnetic radiation for the analysis of the samples. Okay. So usually the samples which are crystalline in nature they can be efficiently analyzed using this X-ray diffraction studies. In short, we call this X-ray diffraction as XRD. Okay. So we have this crystalline materials or crystalline domains within the materials which are analyzed over here, and hence in many cases if we look into the architecture, molecular architecture of the crystalline materials or crystals, then this process is also regarded as crystallography, X-ray crystallography. Okay. Apart from X-ray diffraction, there are X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, and X-ray absorption spectroscopy. Okay. However, in our syllabus, what I have seen is that these two techniques are not there. Also, this X-ray absorption spectroscopy, it is seldom used. Okay. So what I mean to say, it is not very commonly used, so there is no fun in discussing about that. And in X-ray fluorescence, it is similar to the fluorescence spectroscopy what we have discussed. Over there, the only difference is that initially in the fluorescence spectroscopy, we used to have radiations in the UV or visible range. Herein, we use in X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, we use X-ray beam for the analysis. Okay, but since this is not in the syllabus, I will not go into the details of the X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, and I will mainly be restricting myself to X-ray diffraction. Okay. So, as I said, the X-ray diffraction is also regarded as X-ray crystallography if we are looking into the molecular structure of a crystal. Okay. So why I am starting with XRC, in short it is regarded as XRC, because in biological analysis, especially if you want to analyze the protein structures and all these things, we mainly concentrate on the X-ray crystallography. Its principle and the principle of the XRD both remains the same with a subtle difference. What is the difference? In X-ray crystallography, we have to use crystals. Crystals, they have defined molecular structure. Okay. So defined molecular structure, even the atomic structure, defined atomic and the molecular structure. Okay. Whereas when we talk about the XRD analysis, it can be used for even for the amorphous materials or a combination of crystalline and amorphous materials. So there is no distinction between there is no distinction between the type of the material which you can use in XRD. So in XRD you can use any of the things, whereas in X-ray crystallography we are mainly looking into the understanding of the crystals, where we have a structured atomic and the molecular structures. Okay, and we will be looking into the after some time we'll be looking what I mean to say that a regular or structured atomic or the molecular structure. Okay, so what happens over here is that in crystallography, it is basically an experimental science determining the atomic and the molecular structure of a crystal. In this study, the crystalline structure, it causes a beam of incident X-rays to diffract into many directions. Okay. Now, how this diffraction happens? How this diffraction happens? This diffraction happens due to the density of the electrons within the crystal. Okay, so from where these electrons are coming? If you look into the crystals, we have atoms, and we have discussed that atom has a nucleus, and then it is having some orbits where electrons are moving. So what are these? The electrons which are present over here in these orbitals, they are regarded as electron clouds. Why clouds? Because they are constantly moving. What happens to the clouds? The clouds are not present at a particular location at any given period of time, and they start at one position. They may be at position A, at the second instance it may be at position B, and so on. Hence, since these electrons, they are constantly moving, the collection of these electrons which are collectively or they are continuously moving, they are in general, they are regarded as the electron cloud. Okay, so the density of the electron cloud, on which it will depend, it will depend on the atom, right? So whatever atom is there, on that it will be depending. Okay, so what happens is that since there is an alteration in the density of the electrons within the crystals, and these electrons, they are resulting in the diffraction of the X-rays, we will get peaks at different locations. Okay, and these locations, they are basically found out by measuring the angles and at what intensity at this angle, whatever you are measuring, the beams, X-ray beams, have been diffracted. Okay. From this analysis, we can find out the mean positions of the atoms in the crystals. Okay. As well as it is possible to determine the chemical bonds, the nature of the chemical bonds within the crystal. Okay, even it is possible to understand the crystallographic disorder. What type of disorder is there, whether there are any strain onto the crystal, and all these things you can predict from the X-ray studies. Apart from this, there are various other information which can be predicted, and that we will not discuss in this chapter. The method has been used to study the structure and function of many biological molecules that include vitamins, drug acids like DNAs. Okay. In a single crystal X-ray diffraction measurement, a crystal is mounted on a goniometer. The crystal is illuminated with a finely focused monochromatic beam of X-rays, producing a diffraction pattern of regularly spaced spots known as reflections. Okay. the two-dimensional images that are taken at different orientations are converted into a three-dimensional model of the density of the electrons with mathematical method of Fourier transform. Now this information is taken and combined with the chemical data known for the sample. Okay. So the crystals are basically regular arrays of atoms. Okay. They are the regular arrays of atoms, and X-rays can be considered waves of electromagnetic radiations. Now these atoms, they scatter the X-ray waves primarily through the atoms' electrons. Okay. An X-ray photon striking an electron, it produces secondary spherical waves emanating from the electron. This phenomena is known as elastic scattering, and the electron, it is known as the scatterer. Okay. So what it says, if you have the atom, you have the electrons over here, you have the electrons over here, the X-ray beam comes from here, a secondary wave, these electrons may be moved from, they may be, what do you call, ejected out, and then other electrons from there, they can come and take the vacant places, and during this process, or these electrons, the electron can be again attracted back over here, and when they come back to its original levels, they release some X-rays. Okay, so this is called elastic scattering, and the electron, since it is scattering this light, this X-ray photons or X-ray waves, it is regarded, the electrons is regarded as the scatterer. Okay, the X-rays range in the wavelength of 10 to 0.01 nanometer. However, for the X-ray crystallography or for the X-ray studies, 0.1 nanometer X-ray of wavelength 0.1 nanometer, or which is also equivalent to 1 angstrom, it is used for the XRD studies. Okay. Now why this is used? This is used because the X-rays of this wavelength on the scale of covalent chemical bonds and the radius of a single atom. Okay. Longer wavelength photons such as ultraviolet radiations would not have sufficient resolution to determine the atomic positions. Okay. Now half of wavelength should be less than the interatomic distance. Okay. So it means if you have two, if you have a what you call layer of, or the plane of two atoms, and this is say one plane, this is another plane, and if you say this is the distance, interatomic distance, then this interatomic distance d, it should be greater than the lambda by 2. Okay, so that the X-ray beams, they can efficiently interact with the atoms which are present within the samples also. Okay. At the other extreme, the shorter wavelength photons such as gamma rays are difficult to produce in large numbers. Okay, difficult to focus and interact too strongly with the matter. So if you are using a longer wavelength, what you call radiation, they are not able to penetrate within this atomic structure. Okay, within this within the atomic or the molecular structure, whatever the arrangement we are having. Further, if we use shorter wavelength photons, they are very high energy radiations. Say for example, the gamma rays, they are very high energy as compared to the X-rays, and in that case it is difficult to produce an what do you call, an electromagnetic radiation with high intensity, also to focus those beams and to ensure that these electromagnetic radiations, they will be interacting with the matter in a better way. Okay. Although these waves, they cancel one another in most directions through destructive interference. Okay, this is important. Through destructive interference, they add constructively in few specific directions. Okay, which is determined by Bragg's law in lambda equals to 2d sine theta. Okay. Now, let us understand this, what it is saying. Okay. In class 12, you must have studied this diffraction. So suppose there is a slit, and through this slit, if you are passing a beam of light, then it will diffract over here. Okay. Now, for a constructive interference, this distance has been regarded as the d sine theta. Okay. This distance has been regarded as the d sine theta. Now, suppose if we use now, if you consider this as theta, this is also as theta. Okay. This is theta, and this one is also theta basically. This is also theta. Okay. Now, in this case, what happens is that for a constructive interference, we should have this distance. This is d sine theta. And also over here, this distance, it should be d sine theta. Okay. So what is the d? D is basically the distance between this slit, the width of the slit. Okay. Now herein, so the total this thing d sine theta and d sine theta, the total should move so that you can have a constructive interference at the output. Suppose over here you have the detector, then what it should be? It should be an integral multiple of lambda, wavelength of the light what you are using. If you are using a monochromatic light, right? Similarly, over here, if you see, if you look into these black dots, and these black dots are nothing but atoms, the arrangement of atoms within a crystal or within a material. When we are making an X-ray, monochromatic X-ray, okay, I'm telling you the monochromatic X-ray, okay. If when we use a monochromatic X-ray over here, these atom they act as the slits. So this distance, this is the slit opening, which is regarded as the d, which is also the interplanar distance or interatomic distance. Okay. Now, in this case, if you have to have a constructive interference, it should satisfy this Bragg's law. That means 2d sine theta. Okay. Now, if you see, your d is constant, lambda is constant, n usually we take it as 1, okay, and then 2 is constant, only what? Theta is changing. Now, particular theta, all these things can be constant. There can be other arrangements, but for the sake of simplicity, we can understand that at a particular this theta, we will be getting a constructive interference, and at all other what you call will be having, we will be seeing some destructive interference at the output. So when we plot an XRD diffractogram, our x-axis is basically 2 theta and y-axis is intensity of the beam which is reaching the detector. Okay. So here what we get for crystalline material, we get some peaks like this. Okay. Now these peaks, these are due to the constructive interference. Okay, these peaks. And at particular 2 theta angle only, you will be getting these peaks. Okay. Now these specific directions, they appear as spots. If you take an image, so instead of this thing, we have given it as a what you call 2D image. Now, if you place a 3D plate, then you will be getting at different locations, you will be getting spots. Okay. And these spots, they are usually concentric, and it depends on the arrangement of the crystals within arrangement of the atoms within the crystal or within the material. Okay. You can visualize this from the SPR imaging system, SPRI system, which we have discussed in the SPR. Okay. So similarly, over here also, if we use a photographic plate or a 2D array of detector, then we will be able to capture the diffraction pattern at different locations. Okay. So these spots or 2D level, whatever if you get the 2D this thing, if you get this one, then what you get is that, yeah, this where it is, we call it reflections. I thought it somewhere. Scatter atoms, electrons. Anyway, I am not getting that. So these spots, these are regarded as the reflections. Okay, and these reflections, they are happening due to this atom. Now atom is not doing this, done by the electrons that are present within the atom. Are you getting my point? So these electrons, they are regarded as the scatterers. Okay. This specific direction appear as points on the diffraction pattern called reflections. Yeah, over here. Okay. Thus, X-ray diffraction results from an electromagnetic wave impinging on a regular array of scatterers. Regular array of scatterers. That you have to remember. The repeating arrangement of atoms within the crystal. Okay. The incoming beam coming from the left upper side, this one, these beams, causes each scatterer to re-radiate a small portion of its intensity as spherical wave. If the scatterers are arranged symmetrically with a separation d, these spherical waves will be in sync. That means add constructively only in direction where their path length difference 2d sine theta equals an integer multiple of the wavelength lambda. In that case, part of the incoming beam is deflected at an angle of 2 theta, producing a reflection spot in the diffraction pattern. Okay. I hope you have understood what I was trying to tell you over here. Okay.
Yes, yes, sir.
Now, when we talk about single crystal X-ray or single crystal XRD or single crystal X-ray crystallography, it has got three basic steps. Okay, it has got three basic steps. The first one is, and it is the most difficult part. What is it? Obtain an adequate crystal of the material under study. The crystal should be sufficient large, typically larger than 0.1 mm. Okay. Then only you can go for single crystal X-ray crystallography. Are you getting my point? So if you want to do single crystal X-ray crystallography, you will need a single crystal and it should have a dimension of 0.1 mm in all the directions, in all X, Y and Z directions. Okay. No significant internal imperfections such as crack or twining should be present within the crystals if you intend to do single crystal X-ray crystallography. The second step is the crystal is placed in an intense beam of X-rays, usually of a single wavelength monochromatic X-rays, producing the regular patterns of reflections. The angles and the intensities of the diffracted X-rays are measured with each compound having a unit diffraction pattern. As the crystal is gradually rotated, previous reflections disappear and new ones appear. The intensity of every spot is recorded at every orientation of the crystals. Multiple data sets may have to be collected with each set covering slightly more than half a full rotation of the crystal and typically containing tens of thousands of reflections. That means what this full thing wants to say is that you have to do a large number of experiments if you want to go for the crystal structure determination. You have to go for a large number of this thing, and from there you can have the information for reconstructing the crystal structure, for predicting the crystal structure. Okay. Now, in the third step, this is the acquisition step, signal acquisition step. First is the crystal development stage. Second is the acquisition stage. And third step, it is the computational stage. In this, the data are combined computationally with complementary chemical information, which is already available in the literature, to produce and refine a model of the arrangement of atoms within a crystal. Okay. So this actual reconstruction data or the what you call structure prediction model, it happens in the third step. Okay. The final refined model of the atomic arrangement, now called a crystal structure, is usually stored in a public database. Okay. So here, if you see, this workflow has been shown. First, you have to grow a crystal. Okay, and in all the directions it should have dimensions larger than 0.1 mm. Then you get and you have to take a series of X-ray measurements to capture this diffraction data. From there you basically identify the phases. What are the phases? How do you identify? You basically find out the electron density map. Okay, you basically have to find out the electron density map. Once you find out the electron density map, then having the chemical information and chemical information from your previous data and using some this computational tool, you have to predict this atomic model. Okay, And once this atomic model is made, you can save it into the database. Or if you want, if you are not satisfied with the model, you can go for the repeated measurement for the process of refinement of the structure. Okay. So until and unless you get a satisfactory result, you can repeat this refinement process. As I said, the single crystallography, it is usually in biology, it can be carried out for the protein crystals, and the protein crystals, they are almost grown in solution. Okay. So during the crystal growth in solution, it is characterized by two steps. First is nucleation of the microscopic crystallites, followed by the growth of that crystallite, ideally to a diffraction quality crystal. Okay, so what happens over here? I will give you a simple example. Okay, it is not related to protein, just for the sake of understanding what they are saying. What is nucleation site? What are these nucleation points? And what do you mean by crystal growth? Okay, so many of you, you must have seen that your mother, they have, they warm the ghee before they use it for some other purpose. Suppose they want to spread it on the chapati and all this thing, they warm it. So when they warm it, when it is solidified at room temperature, it is basically solidified. Now, when they warm it, what happens? It becomes a clear liquid. That means all the fats, solid fats, which were present in the ghee, they are now in the molten state. Now, slowly, if you keep it at room temperature or at a lower temperature, you will find that initially you can virtually see that some colloidal particles, they are being dispersed. So when you can see this, basically it has started, the fat crystal, they have started growing, because we cannot see beyond below a typical size. So what happens is that this process has already started at the atomic level. Okay, atomic or the molecular level. So what is happening? A couple of atoms, or more, a group of atoms, not couple of atoms, a group of atoms, they are coming closer and they are forming a seed point, so that these globular particle like shape, whatever you are seeing, they can grow and they can attain this thing. Now when you keep it for some more time, what happens? You will find these fat structures, they will form a network structure. Okay, they will form a network structure like this. Okay, so what is happening? Initially, when a group of atoms or molecules, they are coming together to form a seed point, that is called nucleation. And if you see over here, there are a number of nucleation sites. Okay, now slowly these crystals, these seed point crystals or nucleated crystals, they start growing and they form a full what you call a solidified matrix. So the stage where the seed points are being developed and subsequently there is a growth of these crystals, that is called the growth stage. crystal growth stage. So nucleation stage and the crystal growth stage. Okay. So what is nucleation? When they are coming, they are forming microscopic crystallite. So what is this microscopic crystallite? At a larger scale, you will see the atoms are present in a very what you call arranged manner. Now, when the nucleation is starting, at that point, this atomic or the molecular atoms or the molecules, they are forming a small zone of regular structure. So those regular structures which are crystalline in nature, they are called these microscopic crystallites. Okay, and usually they have around 100 molecules over here. Am I clear? So see, first step is nucleation and the second step is subsequent growth of these crystals. Now the crystallographer's goal is to identify the solution conditions that favor the development of a single large crystal, since larger crystals offer improved resolution of the molecule. Okay, so you want to have a crystal which will be having similar property. If you have too many nucleating point, then it can have a problem. If you see, if nuclear, you may get you may ultimately getting a solid structure, but this solid structure may be not providing information, because when you are in a population, in a large population, you will find in a large population some may go wayward. So when some are going wayward, it is changing the characteristics of the whole population, right? Similarly over here also, if nucleation is favored, then a shower of small crystallites will form in the droplet, okay, rather than a one large crystal. And you need to produce a one large crystal if you want to do the single crystal crystallography. If the nucleation is favored too little, no crystal will form whatsoever. Okay. Other approaches involve crystallizing proteins under oil, where aqueous protein solutions are dispensed under liquid oil and water evaporates through the layer of the oil. Okay. Now these are some of the methods. If you see, for preparing crystals, these are the common method. The first one is the hanging drop method. In the hanging drop method, you have the protein solution which is hanging, and then over here you keep the condition such that more of water is being taken down, whereas a small amount of solvent from here, it goes and contributes to this droplet. Okay, so slowly you are trying to remove the solvent from there to obtain the crystals. So you must have in your school level classes, we used to make these sugar crystals. What we did, we used to do, we used to take water, we used to dissolve sugar into that, and after the dissolving, slowly if you bring down the temperature after a critical concentration, you will find that the crystals of sugars, they are being developed. Okay, so what we are doing basically, we are super saturating the thing. Okay, and then when we are cooling it down, the saturation level is coming down, and due to that reason, the crystal starts growing within the solution phase. The same can also be done if you take a sugar solution and then put it under sun rays, so there will be evaporation, and as there is an evaporation, you will find some crystals will be there. So what you are doing, you are basically from a solution, you are removing the solvent, then only you are getting the crystals, right? The same thing you need to do over here also. Okay, so here you have the sitting drop method, the principle is same. And then lastly you have the microdialysis method. Over here you put the solution in a container which is covered with a dialysis membrane, and you make the condition such that much of the solvent it goes out, and only a little amount of solvent it comes in. Slowly this solution it gets concentrated and the crystal starts forming. However, it is this crystal growth, it is a very tedious process. Then you have this XRD. Okay, in this XRD, as I was telling, you will be getting peaks something like this. This is an XRD of a fat system. I'm not going into the detail of that one. The crystallite size of the crystals can be determined using the this formula, where D, this formula is called the Scherer's equation, where D is the crystallite size, K is a constant, and usually Scherer's constant, and it is usually 0.89 for an unknown crystal shape. Okay, if you don't know, you put it in this thing. Lambda is the wavelength, beta is the full width at half maxima of the diffraction peak. So if you have a peak over here like this, so this is the topmost. If you consider it as 100 and 0, so at 50% what is the width you find out, and that width is called full width at half maximum. Okay, lambda is the wavelength of the X-rays. Usually if you are using a copper, I suppose it is 1.789 angstrom. Okay, and the lattice strain it can be calculated using this formula, epsilon equals to beta by 4 tan theta. What is this theta? This theta you have to find out from here. So at what 2 theta you are having this, so from there you find out the location of the 2 theta and then divided it by 2 at what location you are getting the peaks, and divide it by 2, and from there you get the this crystal strain. Okay, lattice strain. So why it happens when you are say having this good arrangement. Okay, now slowly when it is growing, so it is growing say from bottom to top. Slowly what happens in some cases, you get this kind of arrangement. In between some layer, some point it has come. Okay, so what has happened due to this extra atom, there is a connectivity problem. Say this extra atom has come. Now over here if you see, everything is accounted, but what about this thing? So what it is causing is that it is inducing a strain. Say for example, uh, uh, say 10 of your friends, you have gone to Madhuban, okay, and you are having your dinner. In the meantime, I drop in and I join you. Will you be comfortable? You will not be comfortable. You will be having some because I will not be welcomed over there because I do not belong to your class, right? So it will create an undue strain within yourself, and you will be not acting as free as you would have if I was not present over there, right? The same thing happened over here also. When a random atom it gets into within the structure, it leads to the distortion of the crystal structure, the lattice strain, and this strain can be calculated using this effect. Usually, suppose if you have a sharp peak, if you have a very sharp peak, that means you have a perfect arrangement of the atoms or the molecules within the crystal structure. But if there is slight increase in the width, you can expect that within within the crystal there has been some introduction of the strain. Are you getting my point? And what is theta? Theta is the Bragg's angle. Bragg's angle, which you find out from the this X-ray diffractogram. Now, this is an example of an schematic diagram of an X-ray diffractometer. You have a X-ray source. From here, within this, you have initially a collimator. So what collimator would do? Collimator would make the beam as thin as possible, and then you will be having a wavelength selector or the monochromator. Okay, this will go and fall onto the sample stage, and then from here it will be diffracted and it will go to the X-ray detector. Now both this X-ray source and X-ray detector, they move synchronously to get the information. Okay. The similar thing it happens over here also. You have an X-ray this thing. If you do not want to move this X-ray source, then you have this slates. This X-ray tube is there. X-ray is generating the X-ray tube is generating the X-rays. Then you have the solar slits, which will put this thing. This is the primary optics. It will put this solar slits over here. Then you have the divergence slit over here. It will make the X-rays incident onto the sample, and herein the primary optics, it is not moved. Only the secondary optics is moved. So you have the anti-scatter slit, then you again have the solar slit, then the receiving slit, which then moves into the detector. Okay, so this is basically a single crystal monochromator, and this is the nowadays whatever the X-ray machines are coming, they use this kind of arrangement, and it is called Bragg-Brentano type diffractometer. Okay, Bragg-Brentano type diffractometer, and this is the conventional XRD diffractometer. Okay, now the X-ray source, there are usually two types of sources, cobalt source and the copper source. Usually the K alpha is taken. Okay, so for K alpha, average for cobalt is 1.79. So basically this K average, it is composed of K alpha 1 and K alpha 2 and K beta. This K beta, it is rejected. It is not used. A filter is used to filter out this K alpha 1 and K alpha 2. Okay. Usually in our institute, we have this cobalt detector, I suppose, 1.789 here. 1.789. So we have this cobalt X-ray source, but you can also have the copper X-ray source where you have the K alpha average as 1.5418. So this type of X-ray sources, they are usually used. Okay. So with this, we complete this X-ray diffractometer. If you have any questions, please let me know. I am not able to listen any word. Yeah, please tell me.
Sir, now is it?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Sir, is it possible to prepare crystals which consist of different type of atoms, like two or like sodium or potassium, consisting of two different type of atoms?
Yes, it is possible. So over there, what will happen? The potassium, it may enter within the sodium crystal and all this thing. So there are um, You talk with Professor Ray. What he does is that he prepares some glasses, okay, and within those glasses, he dopes some external ions, okay. So while you are doing the doping, what you are doing basically, you are basically incorporating some atoms or ions within the crystal structure of another crystal which is growing. Are you getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Yes, sir.
Hmm. So that is possible. Okay. So you in that what you will be having? You may have this say this is the material, you have the crystal structure, and in between while you are doping, you may get say somewhere this kind of arranged structure or maybe unarranged structure. Since I don't work in that field, I cannot tell you in depth how this doping and all these things are done. So Professor Ray, he is a better person to make you understand how the doping works. But it is possible.
Okay.
So when if we are like handling proteins which are a little bit more sensitive, isn't X-ray like wouldn't X-ray change its structure somehow or break any bonds?
X-ray would change the structure? No. X-ray, why it will change the structure?
Not, I mean, is it powerful enough to break bonds?
Yeah. So how do you think this DNA helix this structure was determined?
Okay, okay, yes.
It
Okay,
was through the XRD only. So the estimation of the DNA structure, it was first predicted on DNA. DNA was first done using the XRD.
okay, sir.